They say you can feel a raid coming before it happens. The air gets heavy. The silence gets too quiet. But that night, at the Iron Brotherhood clubhouse, nobody felt a damn thing. Not until the battering ram hit the front door and 50 federal agents came pouring through like a flood of blue and Kevlar. My name is Marcus Hammer Kane, and I was the Sergeant-at-Arms of the Iron Brotherhood Motorcycle Club. For 15 years, I'd kept that patch on my back clean. I'd protected my brothers. I'd enforced the code. And on the night of September 14th, I watched everything we'd built come crashing down in a hail of searchlights and shouted commands. But here's what the newspapers didn't tell you. Here's what the federal prosecutor left out of his press conference. The raid that night, it wasn't about what they found. It was about what they were looking for. And the reason the Iron Brotherhood survived when dozens of other clubs got torn apart by RICO charges comes down to one decision I made 6 months earlier. A decision that would cost me everything I thought mattered. This is the story of betrayal, brotherhood, and the thin line between loyalty and justice. This is the story of what really happened when the club was caught in a massive police raid. 6 months before the raid, the Iron Brotherhood was at its peak. We weren't the biggest club in the state, but we were respected. Our chapter ran clean, or at least that's what I wanted to believe. We organized charity rides for veterans. We protected our neighborhood from the real predators. We lived by a code that meant something in a world where most people stood for nothing. I'd earned my patch the hard way. Started as a prospect at 23, fresh out of the Marines with nowhere to belong. The club gave me purpose. The brothers gave me family. When my wife left and took my daughter with her, it was the club that kept me from drowning in a bottle. When my father died and I had nobody else to call, 40 brothers showed up at his funeral without being asked. The president of our chapter was a man named Vincent Reaper Castellano. Reaper was old school. 58 years old, been riding since before I was born. He'd built the Iron Brotherhood from 5 guys with rusty Harleys into a legitimate organization with 3 chapters across 2 states. He preached the code constantly, loyalty above all. Brotherhood before blood. Never rat, never fold. But somewhere along the way, things changed. I noticed it gradually, like watching rust creep across chrome. New faces started appearing at the clubhouse, men with harder eyes and quieter conversations. Money started flowing differently. Reaper started taking private meetings that excluded the senior officers. And our runs started including stops that had nothing to do with riding and everything to do with business. I didn't want to understand. I tried to ignore it, told myself it was none of my concern, as long as the club stayed strong. That's what loyalty meant, right? Standing by your brothers even when you didn't agree with every decision. The code was sacred. You didn't question the president. You didn't doubt the patch. Then came the night I met Tommy. Tommy was 17 years old, skinny kid with scared eyes, sitting in the back room of our clubhouse at 2 in the morning. He'd been brought in by one of the new guys, a prospect named Dante, who'd only been around for 3 months. Tommy was shaking, wouldn't look anyone in the eye. And when Reaper asked him to explain what happened, the story that came out made my blood run cold. Tommy had been running packages for Dante, small deliveries at first, quick cash for a kid whose mom was fighting cancer and couldn't pay the rent. But the packages got bigger, the destinations got sketchier. And that night, Tommy had opened one of the packages and found enough fentanyl to kill a small town. He'd panicked, tried to back out. That's when Dante grabbed him by the throat and told him he was in too deep now. He either kept running or he'd disappear. Simple as that. Tommy had run straight to the clubhouse, thinking somehow we'd protect him. Thinking the motorcycle club his uncle used to talk about, the one that helped people, would save him from the nightmare he'd stumbled into. I watched Reaper's face as Tommy told his story, watched the calculation happening behind those cold eyes, and I knew with absolute certainty that Tommy wasn't walking out of that clubhouse alive unless I did something. The kid's a problem, Dante said, standing behind Tommy with his arms crossed. He knows too much. He's unreliable. Reaper lit a cigarette, studying Tommy like he was deciding whether to fix a motorcycle or junk it for parts. "Hammer, what do you think?" This was a test. I could feel every set of eyes in that room on me. The code was clear. You protect the club no matter what. The club comes first, always. "I think," I said slowly, "that we need to figure out what the hell Dante's been doing without chapter approval." The room went silent. You didn't question another brother's actions publicly. You definitely didn't question them in front of an outsider. Dante's jaw tightened. "I've been making money for this club. Something we all agreed we needed to do to keep the lights on. We agreed to legitimate business," I said. "Security work, mechanic shop revenue. Not running poison that kills kids. Since when did you become the morality police, Hammer?" Reaper's voice was soft, dangerous. "We all knew the club was evolving. You want to keep your patch, you adapt. That's how survival works." I looked around the room. Brothers I'd ridden with for years. Men I'd trusted with my life. Some looked uncomfortable, shifting their weight, avoiding my eyes. Others looked stone-faced, committed to whatever decision Reaper made. This wasn't the club I'd joined, or maybe it was, and I'd just been too blind to see it. "The code says we protect the innocent," I said. "Tommy's just a scared kid who made a mistake. We'd let him walk, make sure he understands to keep his mouth shut, and we deal with our internal problems internally." "Can't do that, brother," Reaper said, shaking his head. "Kid's a loose end. You know what happens to loose ends in this business." Tommy started crying. Quiet, desperate sounds that made him seem even younger than 17. I thought about my own daughter, barely older than this kid, living 3 states away with a mother who'd made sure I only saw her twice a year. What would I want someone to do if she was sitting in this chair? "We let him go," I said, standing up. "Or you're going to have to go through me first." The room exploded. Brothers shouting, chairs scraping, Reaper on his feet, pointing at me with rage contorting his face. "You're willing to throw away your patch for some random kid?" He demanded. "I'm willing to throw away my patch for what the patch is supposed to mean," I said. "We used to stand for something. When did we become the thing we used to hunt?" Reaper stared at me for a long moment. Then he nodded to 2 of the brothers. "Take Hammer and the kid outside. We'll vote on what happens to both of them." They didn't kill us that night. Instead, Reaper made a different choice, one that might have been worse in the long run. He stripped me of my sergeant-at-arms position and put me on suspension. I could keep my patch, but I was out of club business for 6 months. Tommy was let go with a warning that if he ever spoke about what happened, they'd find him. I made Tommy promise me he'd disappear, leave the state, never look back. He hugged me, crying, and then ran into the night like the devil himself was chasing him. I went home to my empty apartment, poured 3 fingers of whiskey, and stared at my cut hanging on the back of the door. The patch I'd earned with blood and sacrifice, the brotherhood I'd given everything to, and I realized I was standing at a crossroads that would define the rest of my life. The next morning, I did something I'd never imagined doing. I called a federal agent. Special Agent Rebecca Caldwell had been investigating motorcycle clubs in our region for 5 years. She'd approached me twice before trying to flip me, offering deals and protection. Both times I'd told her where she could shove her badge. But that morning I asked to meet. We sat in her car in a shopping center parking lot 30 miles from my apartment. She looked at me with a mixture of surprise and suspicion. "I need you to understand something," I told her. "I'm not a rat. I'm not here to help you destroy the Iron Brotherhood. But there's something happening in my club that's going to get people killed. Innocent people, kids. So tell me," she said, "I need guarantees first. Tommy, the kid from last night, he gets immunity, complete protection. And when you make your move, you do it smart. The brothers who aren't involved in the drug operation, they don't get burned for Reaper's sins." Agent Caldwell studied me for a long moment. "You're asking me to perform surgery instead of amputation. That's not how RICO works, Hammer. Then make it work. Because if you don't, I walk out of this car and you never hear from me again. And whatever you're planning, it fails, because you don't have anyone inside." She negotiated hard, but eventually we reached an agreement. I would feed her information about the drug operation specifically. Dates, amounts, connections. Nothing about legitimate club business or brothers who weren't involved. In exchange, she would build a case that targeted only the bad actors and left the rest of the club intact. For 6 months, I lived a double life. During the day, I worked at my motorcycle shop, taking calls from Agent Caldwell, feeding her carefully selected intelligence. At night, I attended club meetings during my suspension period, watching Dante and Reaper expand their operation, bringing in more product, recruiting more desperate kids like Tommy to run their poison. The other brothers treated me differently, some with pity, thinking I'd lost my edge, others with suspicion, wondering if I'd lost my loyalty. I kept my head down and my mouth shut, playing the role of a humbled soldier waiting to earn back his position. But inside, I was dying. Every conversation with Agent Caldwell felt like a betrayal of everything I'd stood for. Every piece of information I passed along felt like another nail in the coffin of the brotherhood I'd loved. The code said never rat, never fold. I was doing both. The only thing that kept me going was the memory of Tommy's scared eyes, and the knowledge that somewhere in the pipeline of Poison Reaper was moving, there were more Tommies, more kids, more families destroyed. I told myself I wasn't betraying the club. I was saving it, cutting out the cancer before it killed the whole body. But late at night, staring at my cut hanging on the wall, I wondered if I was just a coward trying to justify treachery with noble intentions. The raid came on a Friday night. Agent Caldwell had given me 3 hours warning, enough time to make sure certain brothers weren't at the clubhouse. I'd sent text messages to guys I knew were clean, suggesting they skip the weekly meeting. Most had listened. A few hadn't. When the battering ram hit the door, I was standing in the main room with 11 other brothers. The feds came in fast and hard, overwhelming us with numbers and tactics honed from decades of bringing down criminal organizations. We were on the ground with zip ties on our wrists before most of us could even process what was happening. But it was the look on Reaper's face that I'll never forget. As they dragged him past me toward the door, he locked eyes with me, and in that moment he knew. He knew it was me. 15 years of brotherhood, and he could read my guilt like a neon sign. Judas, he whispered. Just that one word, dripping with venom and betrayal. They separated us at the federal building. I was taken to a private room where Agent Caldwell explained what happened next. The raid had yielded exactly what she needed. Enough fentanyl to put Reaper and Dante away for decades. Financial records showing the full scope of their operation. And most importantly, testimony from 3 other brothers who, once faced with the evidence, agreed to cooperate. You did good work, Agent Caldwell said. We've been trying to crack this pipeline for 2 years. You saved lives, Hammer, but I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like exactly what Reaper called me. The legal process moved fast. Reaper and Dante were charged with drug trafficking conspiracy under RICO statutes. 3 other brothers who'd been directly involved in the operation took plea deals. The rest of the club, the ones who'd been kept in the dark or marginally aware, were released with warnings. I was given a new identity and relocation assistance. The Federal Witness Protection Program, though I'd technically never testified in court. Agent Caldwell explained that my cooperation had made me a target, and the cartels Reaper had been working with didn't forget debts or betrayals. But I refused. I wasn't running. I wasn't hiding. I'd made my choice, and I'd live with the consequences in the open, as the man I was, not some ghost with a fake name. 2 weeks after the raid, I got a visitor at my shop. His name was Diego Chains Mercado, and he'd been the vice president of our chapter. Diego was one of the brothers I'd made sure wasn't at the clubhouse that night. He walked in, closed the door behind him, and for a long moment just stared at me. Everyone knows it was you, he said finally. The timeline doesn't lie. The way the feds moved, who they arrested and who they didn't. You're either the luckiest bastard alive, or you set it up. I set it up, I said. No point in lying. Diego nodded slowly. Reaper's been asking about you from lockup. Wants to know why. After everything the club gave you, why'd you burn us? I didn't burn the club, I said. I burned the cancer that was killing it. Reaper stopped being a brother the moment he started poisoning kids for profit. That's not what we stood for. That's not what the code meant. The code meant loyalty, Diego said. Above everything else. You broke it. No, I said, meeting his eyes. Reaper broke it first. I just refused to go down with him. Diego was quiet for a long time. Then he reached into his jacket, and I tensed, wondering if this was where it ended. But instead of a weapon, he pulled out my sergeant-at-arms patch. The one they'd taken from me 6 months earlier. The remaining brothers took a vote, he said. Those of us who survived, who weren't part of Reaper's operation. We voted on what to do about you. It was close, real close. Some wanted you dead. Some wanted you out forever. But the majority, we decided you did what you thought was right. You tried to save the club, even if it meant destroying yourself in the process. He set the patch on my workbench. We're rebuilding. New leadership, new direction. Back to what we used to be, before Reaper went dark. We could use a sergeant-at-arms who actually gives a damn about the code. The real code. Not the twisted version Reaper sold us. I looked at the patch, that piece of leather and thread that had meant everything to me for 15 years. The symbol of brotherhood I'd betrayed and tried to save in the same breath. I can't, I said. I crossed a line. Once you become an informant, once you work with the feds, you can't go back. The patch stops meaning what it's supposed to mean. Maybe, Diego said. Or maybe the patch means what we decide it means. Loyalty to brothers who deserve it. Courage to stand against corruption, even when it costs you everything. Sacrifice for something bigger than yourself. Sounds like you embodied all of that to me. I didn't take the patch that day. Told Diego I needed time to think, to figure out who I was beyond the leather and the motorcycle and the brotherhood. But 6 months later, I showed up to a charter meeting. The Iron Brotherhood had changed. Smaller now, but cleaner. The brothers who remained were the ones who'd always lived by the real code, the one about honor and protecting the innocent and standing for something meaningful. Diego was president now. When I walked in, the room went quiet. Then one by one, the brothers stood up. No one spoke. They just stood there, acknowledging me in that silent way riders have, the respect that doesn't need words. Diego held out the sergeant-at-arms patch. You earned this, he said. Not just before, but especially after. You made the hardest choice a brother can make. You chose right over easy. That's the kind of man we want enforcing the code. I took the patch with shaking hands. As I sewed it back onto my cut that night alone in my shop, I thought about Tommy, wondered where he was, if he'd made it out okay, if he'd found a better life far from the darkness that had almost consumed him. I thought about Reaper, serving 25 years in a federal prison, probably still cursing my name. I thought about the code and what it really means to be loyal to something bigger than yourself. The newspapers called me an informant. The federal prosecutor called me a hero. The brothers called me Hammer, and that was enough. Here's what I learned through all of this. Loyalty isn't blind obedience. Brotherhood isn't covering up crimes. The code isn't about protecting bad men doing bad things just because they wear the same patch you do. Real loyalty means having the courage to save your brothers from themselves. Real brotherhood means holding each other accountable to be better men. And the real code means standing for justice, even when it cost you everything you thought defined you. The raid that night, it didn't destroy the Iron Brotherhood. It saved it, burned away the rot so something true could grow in its place. I still ride, still wear my cut, still live by the code. But now I understand that the code was never about blind loyalty to flawed men. It was always about loyalty to the principles those men were supposed to represent. That's what happened when the club was caught in a massive police raid. We lost brothers. We lost our innocence. We lost the comfortable lie that loyalty meant never questioning your family. But we found something more valuable. The truth that real brotherhood means fighting for each other's souls, not just defending each other's sins. I'm Marcus Hammer. Kane. I'm a brother of the Iron Brotherhood Motorcycle Club. I'm an informant who worked with federal agents to bring down a drug operation. and I'd make the same choice again, every single time, because some lines are worth crossing when you're crossing them to save someone's life. Even if that someone is the Brotherhood itself, the road goes on. We ride it with the scars of our choices and the weight of our responsibilities. But we ride it as men who tried to do right when everything told us to do wrong. And in the end, that's all any of us can do. Choose honor over comfort, justice over convenience, and the hard right over the easy wrong. The engine roars, the brothers ride, and somewhere on that endless highway, redemption waits for those brave enough to reach for it.